What does it mean to let your yes mean yes? During Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5 through 7, Jesus addressed those who make oaths. And in doing so, he taught that your yes should mean yes, and your no should mean no. Matthew chapter 5, particularly verses 33 through 37. He says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, 'You must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord.' But I tell you, don't take an oath at all, either by heaven, because it is God's throne, or by the earth, because it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, because it is the city of the great King. Do not swear by your head, because you cannot make a single hair white or black. But let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more than this is from the evil one." Similarly, James also wrote about not making oaths and letting your yes mean yes and your no mean no. In James chapter 5 and verse 12, he says, "Above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or with any other oath. But let your yes mean yes and your no mean no, so that you won't fall under judgment." So, we see this in these couple of passages, and so it's important for us to understand and live by the instructions in these passages. So what's it mean? Number one, let's consider the common practice of making oaths. Certainly both during Bible times as well as today, it was and is common for people to make oaths or pledges or promises. Now in Bible times, as with today, it was also common for people to swear by all sorts of different things. People commonly promise and swear to do all kinds of different things, or to not do those things. And these oaths are often considered to be placed on a higher level than all their other words and statements. You know, if you really make an oath and you really mean it, right? Whenever someone swears or promises to do something, it's viewed as being more serious than if somebody simply says they will do the thing. Well, then there are also degrees in the seriousness of the oath, depending on what the person is swearing by. In these ways, people today are not all that different from people in Bible times regarding making oaths. So with that little bit of context, but then we also think about how oaths to God were viewed as important to keep. The law of Moses plainly taught that oaths that were made to God must be kept to avoid sinning. Like in Leviticus 19 and verse 12, it said, "Do not swear falsely by my name, profaning the name of the Lord your God. I am the Lord." Or in Numbers 30 and verse 2, when a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to put himself under an obligation, he must not break his word. He must do whatever he has promised. In Deuteronomy 23 verse 21, "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to keep it, because he will require it of you, and it will be counted against you as sin." So, Jesus stated that his audience had heard such things. Matthew 5, verse 33, as we looked at. Right? "You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, 'You must not break your oath, but you must keep your oaths to the Lord.'" Well, that perhaps those passages help us to see kind of where that comes from. And it was certainly common thought at the time. However, it seems that oaths that did not invoke the name of God were viewed as less binding than ones that did. For example, the text seems to indicate that people would swear by heaven, by earth, by Jerusalem, by their own heads, etc., as you read verses 34 and 35, as we've already looked at. So what happened, from my understanding of things, is that individuals would view, if you made an oath to God, well, that was really serious. That needed to be kept. But if you made oaths by these other things, well, then it wasn't as serious to keep. So what that resulted in was then the devaluation of vows. Look in Matthew 23, verses 16 through 22. Jesus addresses the religious leaders in this passage, the Pharisees and the scribes, and he says, "Woe to you, blind guides, who say, 'Whoever takes an oath by the temple, it means nothing. But whoever takes an oath by the gold of the temple is bound by his oath.' Blind fools! For which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctified the gold? Also, whoever takes an oath by the altar, it means nothing. But whoever takes an oath by the gift that is on it is bound by his oath. Blind people, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, the one who takes an oath by the altar takes an oath by it and by everything on it. The one who takes an oath by the temple takes an oath by it and by him who dwells in it. And the one who takes an oath by heaven takes an oath by God's throne and by him who sits on it." So it was kind of thought that there were certain things that were binding and certain things that were not. And certainly the same thing can be seen today as people make many promises and say all kinds of things that they just don't really mean. They view some things perhaps as things that rise to that level of importance if they need to keep those, but not all of them. And so what Jesus says then is, do not make oaths. Those who would make oaths should recognize that swearing by things they believe to be less significant did not make the oath less binding. For swearing by heaven was to swear by God's throne. Swearing by earth was God's footstool. Swearing by Jerusalem was the city of the great king. Right? Matthew 5, verses 34 and 35 makes these connections. Jesus is showing them. Don't separate these things. So it all has connections with God, as everything good, of course, does. Then swearing by one's own head was meaningless because one couldn't even change the color of a single hair, verse 36 shows us. So Jesus' solution was simply not to make oaths so as to think that doing such would make a person's words valuable. Don't think that that's what's going to be required for your words to be important. Don't devalue your words based on what you take an oath by. So Jesus' followers should say what they mean and mean what they say. So instead of relying on making oaths for someone to know that you mean what you say, or even relying on making certain kinds of oaths for people to know that you mean what you say, Jesus' solution is for your yes to really mean yes, and for your no to really mean no. That was Matthew 5 and verse 37. That's James 5 and verse 12. That is, let every one of your words be valuable. Use your words in such a way so that you don't need to swear on anything or anyone for people to know that what you mean. And therefore you must not let your words become devalued by saying things you do not mean, or by not keeping your words. Surely such a one who is careful with his or her words and living in the footsteps of Jesus won't need to say more than that. For Jesus was always trustworthy. Rather, anything more than this is of Satan. So let your words mean what they say. To let your yes mean yes and your no mean no is simply to say what you mean and to mean what you say. If you must say more than this for your words to be valuable, then you need to carefully evaluate the ways in which you may have devalued your words in the past, where you said something and you really didn't mean it. You didn't carry through with it. So rather than looking to make oaths by swearing and promising for someone to know that you mean what you say, simply let your words mean exactly what you say.